My name is Sarah. I'm 35, and I've spent the last 10 years as a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital, the kind of place where I've held babies through withdrawal, walked parents through diagnoses no one should ever have to hear, and learned to read a room in 3 seconds flat. I know how to spot when someone is hiding pain behind a calm face. It's the first thing they teach you, even if nobody says it out loud. So when the manila envelope for my daughter's elementary school landed on our kitchen counter with someone else's name on the enrollment form inside it, I should have trusted the same instinct that saved me in 100 exam rooms. I didn't. I called the school, assumed a clerical error, and set it aside next to the grocery list. That envelope sat on my counter for 6 days before I opened the folder inside it properly. 6 days before I found the words that ended my marriage as I understood it. Adoptive parent. My husband's name. A child I had never met. Sharing our home address. He thought the secret was buried deep enough that a school database glitch would never surface it. He hadn't counted on a front office assistant sending the wrong packet to the wrong Whitfield family, or on what those 4 pages were about to tell me about the last 6 years of my life. Welcome back to the channel, where real families face the moments that break them open, and where the people living through it walk out the other side with their dignity intact. If a quiet betrayal has ever unraveled everything you thought you knew, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe, but let me take you back to the Tuesday morning before that envelope arrived, because you need to understand who I was before I knew what I know now. I met Daniel when I was 26, 3 years into my nursing career, exhausted in the particular way that only night shifts in a NICU can exhaust you. He was a project manager for a construction firm, steady, funny in a low-key way, the kind of man who remembered which coffee order belonged to which coworker and never made you repeat yourself. We got married 2 years later in my parents' backyard in Ohio with string lights and a borrowed sound system. My mother cried through the vows. My father gave a toast about how he'd never seen me let my guard down for anyone before Daniel. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent my 20s keeping people at arm's length, watching my own parents' marriage fracture slowly under the weight of things nobody said out loud. I promised myself I wouldn't build a life like that. I wanted a marriage with no locked drawers, no version of events that only one person got to know. For a long time, I believed that's what I had. I was wrong about almost everything I believed for the next 9 years, but I didn't know that yet. We tried for 3 years to have a baby. 3 years of ovulation calendars and disappointment delivered in the form of a single pink line. 3 years of Daniel holding my hand in waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and hope. When Lily was finally born, 7 years ago now, I remember thinking that whatever had been hard about our marriage before her, we'd survived it together, stitch by stitch. I want you to hold on to that memory because it's going to matter later. I want you to remember what I believed a partnership was, because everything that comes next is measured against it. Lily is 7 now, in 2nd grade, missing her 2 front teeth and obsessed with a cartoon about talking dogs that I could recite in my sleep. We live in a 4-bedroom house in a suburb outside Columbus, the kind of neighborhood with cul-de-sacs and a community pool, the kind of life that looks, from the outside, like something people work their whole lives to build. From the outside was exactly the problem. I only understood how much I was missing once I was standing on the inside of it. I worked 12-hour shifts, 3 or 4 days a week. Daniel ran his own small general contracting business by then, renovations mostly, kitchens and bathrooms, and the occasional full remodel. He traveled for bids sometimes, stayed late at job sites more than I loved, but I trusted him the way you trust a floor you've walked on for a decade, without it ever creaking. I want you to remember that image, a floor that's never once creaked, because it matters for what comes next. That Tuesday morning started like every other one. I dropped Lily at school, drove to a 12-hour shift, came home to leftovers and a stack of mail Daniel had left on the counter without sorting, the way he always did. Among the bills and the grocery store flyers was a manila envelope from Ridgeline Elementary, Lily's school. I didn't think anything of it. Schools send home 100 envelopes a year, book fare forms, field trip permission slips, the annual re-enrollment packet every family fills out in the spring. I had no idea that particular envelope wasn't like the others. Nothing about it warned me. I set it on the counter to deal with later, the way you set aside anything that doesn't scream for your attention. I had a double shift the next day. Lily needed help with a diorama. Later meant 6 days. Here's the thing I didn't know yet, the thing I want you to sit with while I walk you back through those 6 days. Somewhere in a filing cabinet at a district office, a different Whitfield family, no relation to us, whose son also attended Ridgeline, had their enrollment renewal packet mixed up with something else entirely. A separate file. A file that had been quietly created, updated, and maintained for 6 years without me ever knowing it existed. That file had my husband's name on it. It had our home address on it, an address that had been listed there for 11 months, though I would only learn the timeline later. And it had a child's name on it that I had never heard spoken in my house, not once, not by accident, not in 6 years of marriage to a man I thought told me everything. 6 years. I need you to sit with that number because it's going to come back again and again. I didn't open the envelope for 6 days because I was tired, because my life was full, because nothing about a plain manila envelope from an elementary school suggests it's about to detonate everything you've built. My coworker Priya noticed something was off with me that week before I'd even opened the folder properly, back when all I had was an unopened envelope sitting on my counter and a strange, low hum of unease I couldn't name yet. We were charting side by side in the break room, and she asked if everything was okay at home, the way you ask a friend who's gone quiet in a way that isn't like her. I told her I was just tired. She didn't push, but she said something I keep coming back to now. You always know when something's wrong before you can explain why. Trust that. I laughed it off at the time. I didn't laugh it off later. I want to be honest with you the way I promised myself I'd be honest in this story. Part of me almost didn't open it at all. Part of me almost handed it straight to Daniel and said, "This is probably yours, some paperwork thing, deal with it." If I had done that, if I'd been 30 seconds lazier that Sunday evening, I wonder sometimes whether I'd still be living the life I thought I had. But I didn't hand it to him. I opened it myself, at the kitchen table, on a Sunday night while Daniel was in the garage finishing a bid for a client, with Lily upstairs already asleep. The first page was ordinary. A standard Ridgeline Elementary cover letter, generic, addressed to Dear Whitfield family. I almost stopped there. I almost folded it back into the envelope and left it on his side of the counter with a sticky note that said, "This is yours, I think." Then I saw the second page, and the ordinary evening I'd been having ended. It was an emergency contact and custody verification form, the kind schools require when a child's guardianship status is anything other than straightforward, biological parents both listed, nothing unusual. This one had a checkbox marked, adoptive parent. Beside it, in the school's neat data entry font, was a name, Daniel Whitfield. Not as an emergency contact. Not as a family friend listed for pickup authorization. As the adoptive parent of record. The child's name was Ethan. Age 6. Enrolled at Ridgeline Elementary the previous August, in a different classroom on a different hallway than Lily's, a school I had walked into 100 times, past a child I apparently shared a driveway with and had never once seen. The home address on the form was ours. Our street. Our house number. Our zip code. Our address. Not a coincidence. Not a mistake. Someone had typed that in on purpose, more than once. I read it 4 times before my brain would accept what my eyes were telling it. I remember the specific physical sensation of the room tilting slightly, the way it does right before you faint, except I didn't faint. I sat very still and read a stranger's name over and over, waiting for it to rearrange itself into something that made sense. It didn't. If you have ever read 4 lines of text and felt your entire life reorganize itself around them, you already know there's no controlled way to move through the next 60 seconds. I didn't cry. I didn't call out for Daniel. I sat at my own kitchen table with a form in my hand that said my husband had a son I'd never met, living somewhere, enrolled at our daughter's school, listed at our address, and I did the only thing 15 years of nursing has ever trained me to do in a crisis. I got very, very calm. I want you to understand what that calm actually was, because it wasn't peace. It was the same calm I use when a monitor starts alarming in a room with a critical patient, the calm that exists specifically so your hands don't shake while you figure out what's actually wrong. It's a tool, not a feeling. And I reached for it because some animal part of my brain already understood that whatever I was about to learn, I was going to need steady hands to survive it. I slid the papers back into the folder. I didn't confront him that night. Not because I was a coward, though I've turned that question over more times than I can count since. I held back because I am a person who needs to understand the shape of a thing before I touch it, and that night, all I had were 4 pages and a name I'd never heard. I told Daniel I had a headache and went to bed early. He kissed my forehead on his way to brush his teeth and said something about a client in Dublin who kept changing the scope of a bathroom remodel. I said something back. I don't remember what. I lay in the dark next to a man I had shared a bed with for 9 years and listened to him fall asleep within 11 minutes, the way he always did, easy and untroubled, while I stared at the ceiling and started building a case file in my head the way I'd build a chart on a patient whose symptoms didn't add up yet. I didn't sleep, and somewhere around 3 a.m., I made a decision that would change everything I found the next morning. The next morning, I did something I am not proud of and would do again without hesitation. I went through his home office while he was on a job site. I found the folder in the third drawer of his desk, tucked behind old tax documents, unlabeled, the kind of hiding in plain sight that only works on someone who has no reason to go looking. Inside it were things that took the shape of my husband's other life laid out in paper. A birth certificate for a boy named Ethan Cole Whitfield, born 6 years ago, listing Daniel as the father. A woman's name on the mother's line I didn't recognize. Vanessa Cole. A name I had never once heard my husband say out loud. That silence, I would soon learn, had been very deliberate. Court documents from an adoption finalized 14 months earlier, converting what had apparently been an informal custody arrangement into something legal and permanent. Bank statements from an account I'd never seen, with monthly transfers going back years, small enough not to register against our joint finances, steady enough to have quietly funded a second child's entire existence. And photographs. A boy with Daniel's exact jawline, the same crooked smile I'd fallen in love with in another man's face, growing up across 6 years of pictures I'd never been shown, birthdays I'd never known were happening while I was at my own daughter's birthdays, thinking my family was whole. I sat on the floor of my husband's office for 40 minutes with those photographs spread out around me like evidence at a crime scene, because that's exactly what they were. I noticed things about those photographs that I couldn't stop noticing once I'd seen them. A birthday cake shaped like a dinosaur, the same bakery box in the background that I recognized from a shop 2 miles from our house, the one where I'd ordered Lily's 5th birthday cake. A hospital bracelet in one photo, tiny and pink, the kind newborns wear, dated the same month I'd been up at 3 a.m. with a colicky infant, convinced my husband's exhaustion matched my own for the same reasons. It didn't. He'd been exhausted for an entirely different life. There was a photo of Ethan at what looked like a school open house, maybe 18 months old in it, sitting on Daniel's shoulders in a t-shirt from a 5K our own family had run together that same spring, the shirt still folded in Daniel's dresser drawer at home, worn twice a year for our annual charity walk. He'd worn the same shirt in both lives. I don't know why that detail broke something in me more than the birth certificate did, but it did. That shirt meant he hadn't just kept 2 lives separate. He'd let them touch, quietly right under my nose, more than once. If you've ever discovered that the life you were building was only half the story, you already know the particular kind of quiet that settles over a house in that moment. Stay with me, because what I found in that drawer was only the beginning of what he'd been hiding. I need to back up further because understanding what I found meant understanding when it started, and once I started pulling that thread, the whole sweater came apart in my hands. The bank statements went back nearly 7 years. 7 years ago, Lily was a newborn, and I was in the hardest stretch of my life, 3 months postpartum, drowning in a depression nobody diagnosed until months later because I kept insisting I was fine, running on 2 hours of broken sleep and telling everyone I was managing. Daniel was traveling more that year than any year before or since, chasing bigger contracts, building the client base that would eventually let him go independent. I remember that period as a blur of exhaustion. I did not remember it until that morning on his office floor, as the period during which my husband met a woman named Vanessa Cole at a renovation site in Cincinnati began an affair that lasted, according to the timeline scrawled in his own handwriting on a legal pad, I also found, roughly 8 months, and got her pregnant 3 months before I finally climbed out of my postpartum fog enough to notice my own baby smiling at me for the first time. Ethan was born the following spring, for months after Lily's first birthday. 4 months. That's the number that broke me open on that office floor, more than any single document did. I read that timeline standing in my own kitchen with my knees threatening to give out, doing math I never wanted to do, counting backward from a 6-year-old's birthday to the exact weeks I had been at my most broken, breastfeeding at 3 a.m., and believing my husband when he said work was just brutal right now. I want to tell you I confronted him that day. I didn't. I put everything back exactly where I found it, in the exact order, because 15 years of nursing has also taught me that once you tip your hand too early, people manage the story instead of telling you the truth. I needed to know the whole shape of it first. I needed to know what he'd built around this secret, and who else had been standing inside it with him. That took me another 9 days. 9 days of going to work, coming home, making Lily's lunches, kissing my husband goodnight, and quietly becoming a different kind of investigator than the one my job usually asks me to be. I am good at reading charts. It turns out I am also good, when the stakes are high enough, at reading a marriage the same way. I found out that Vanessa Cole had died in a car accident on a rain-slicked overpass a little over 2 years ago, when Ethan was 4. I found that out from an obituary I found cached in Daniel's search history, a search history he had never bothered to clear because he had never imagined I would look. A woman was dead, and my husband had grieved her somewhere I never saw, in a life I didn't know existed. I found out that after her death, Ethan had gone to live with Vanessa's older sister for about a year while Daniel, according to a string of old texts I found on a second phone hidden in his truck's center console, quote, figured out how to handle it without blowing up everything, end quote. I found out that 14 months ago, around the time our own family had been going through what I believed was simply a stressful season, financially tight from a slow quarter in his business, Daniel had finalized the adoption. Legally, permanently his son. Ethan had moved from his aunt's house into an apartment 15 minutes from ours that Daniel had been quietly leasing under his business's name, an apartment I had never once heard mentioned, paid for out of an account I had never once seen a statement from. 15 minutes. That's how close his second life had been living to mine this entire time. And I found out that Daniel's mother knew. Had known for years, in fact, since before Ethan was even born. There was a group text thread on that second phone, Daniel, his mother, and his younger sister spanning 6 years, filled with photos of Ethan at every birthday, every school picture day, every small milestone of a little boy's life, celebrated in a group chat that had been built and maintained specifically to exclude me from a family that, on paper, existed one street over from the family I thought was the only one Daniel had. I sat with that message thread open on the truck's dashboard for a long time before I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I scrolled back further than I meant to, past 100 small moments I would never get to have shared knowledge of. A first day of kindergarten photo Carol had captioned with 3 heart emojis, a message from Rachel that read, "He has Danny's exact laugh. It's unreal." Sent the same week I remembered Rachel sitting at my kitchen table complimenting how much Lily's laugh sounded like her father's, as if that was the only version of that sentence she was allowed to say out loud to me. There was a message from Carol, sent the week after Vanessa's funeral, that read, "We'll figure out how to fold him in eventually. Just not yet. Sarah's dealing with enough already with her mom's diagnosis." My mother's cancer diagnosis had happened that same spring. I remembered Carol bringing over a casserole. I remembered thinking at the time how kind she was being. I hadn't known I was being managed even then, my own grief used as a reason to keep managing me further. They had used my mother's cancer as cover. That's the moment I stopped feeling numb and started feeling something closer to rage. His mother had come to our house for Thanksgiving 4 months earlier, hugged Lily, admired my table setting, and eaten dinner across from me knowing my husband had a son she'd watched grow up in photographs I would never be shown. She passed the mashed potatoes with the same hand that had been texting birthday wishes to a grandson I didn't know existed. If you've ever realized that a betrayal wasn't one person's secret but an entire family's quiet agreement, you know exactly the kind of cold that settles into your chest. That cold stayed with me through 9 days of pretending everything was fine, because I needed to decide, with a clear head and steady hands, exactly how I was going to handle the truth once I finally let it land. I didn't want a screaming match in our kitchen where he could manage the narrative, apologize just enough, cry just enough, and turn my discovery into a wound he got to control the healing of. I have watched enough families in crisis, standing at hospital bedsides, to know that the person who controls the moment of reckoning controls what happens after it. I told Priya, eventually on day 7, in the same break room where she'd first noticed something was wrong. I told her everything, the folder, the bank account, the group chat, the apartment 15 minutes away. She was quiet for a long moment before she said, "You already know what you're going to do. You've known since the second day. You're just building the courage to do it in order." She wasn't wrong. My friend Monica, who I've known since nursing school, said something blunter when I called her that same night, sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage instead of driving home. Don't you dare confront him quietly in your kitchen, so he can cry his way into your sympathy. Make him say it somewhere he can't control. I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in a week, because it was exactly what some cold, clear part of me had already decided to do. So I decided to let him believe, for those 9 days, that nothing had changed. And I decided that when I finally confronted him, it wasn't going to happen alone, in private, where he could talk his way around it the way he'd apparently talked his way around everything else for 6 years. It was going to happen with witnesses. The same witnesses who had spent 6 years helping him hide it. Daniel's mother, Carol, hosts a family dinner every year for her birthday, the third Saturday in October, at her house 40 minutes north of ours. Everyone comes. Daniel's sister Rachel, her husband, their 2 kids, a handful of aunts and cousins, the whole extended orbit of people who'd sat at my table, held my daughter, called themselves my family for 9 years. This year's dinner fell 6 days after I found that folder in Daniel's desk. I told him I was looking forward to it. I helped Lily pick out a dress. I baked the lemon bars Carol always requested, the ones she called every single year, the only thing worth driving 40 minutes for. I want to be honest about something. Some of you watching this might think what I did next was cruel, staging a reckoning in front of a room full of people instead of handling it privately, giving him a chance to explain himself away from an audience. I've turned that over more times than I can count, and here's where I've landed. Daniel didn't build his secret alone, quietly, in a vacuum where only he had to carry it. He built it with a support system. His mother drove to that apartment. His sister liked photos of a little boy I'd never met. An entire family had spent 6 years managing a lie together, deciding collectively that I was the one person who didn't deserve to know. If they were going to be part of the secret, they were going to be part of the truth. I spent the morning of that dinner doing something I hadn't expected to do, which was print copies. 3 of them, folded into my purse, the birth certificate, the adoption decree, 1 photograph, not out of cruelty, but because I had spent 6 years believing things a family told me, and I was done doing that without proof sitting right beside me. Lily picked her own dress that morning, a yellow one with small white flowers, and asked me, while I zipped it up, whether Grandma Carol's birthday dinner was going to have the good rolls. I told her it probably would. I remember thinking, zipping up my daughter's dress with steady hands, that I was about to end her entire understanding of what our family looked like, and she had no idea, and there was no way to prepare a 7-year-old for that. So I didn't try. I just made sure her shoes were the comfortable ones, in case we needed to leave quickly. We arrived at Carol's house a little after 5. The driveway was already lined with cars I recognized, Rachel's minivan, Carol's sedan, and Aunt's SUV I'd seen at every holiday for nearly a decade. Inside, the house smelled like roast chicken and the particular blend of candles Carol always burned, and the dining room table was already half set with the good china she only brought out twice a year. Everyone hugged me at the door the way they always had. Rachel complimented Lily's dress. Carol took the lemon bars from my hands with the same delighted gasp she made every October, like she hadn't requested them herself weeks earlier. I smiled through every second of it, the same smile I use in a hospital hallway when a family is about to receive news I already know and they don't yet. Pleasant. Warm. Fully, deliberately in control. We sat down to dinner around 6. 14 people at a table meant for 12, elbows brushing, wine being poured, the easy noise of a family who had no idea the ground under them was about to shift. Daniel sat across from me, relaxed, laughing at something his brother-in-law said about a football game, a man completely unaware that the wife across the table from him had spent 9 days building a case file with his own hidden documents as the evidence. I let the meal run its course. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the green bean dish Carol has made exactly the same way for as long as I've known her. I answered questions about my hospital rotation. I asked Rachel's kids about school. I ate slowly, deliberately, the way you eat when you're waiting for the right moment, and you have all the patience in the world, because you already know how the story ends. Dessert came out around 7:30. Carol cut the lemon bars herself, proud, the way she always was, and set a plate in front of everyone at the table. I waited until every fork had touched a plate. I waited until the room had settled into that particular lull that happens after a big meal, when conversation slows and people start reaching for coffee, when everyone's guard is at its lowest because they believe the hard part of the evening, the meal itself, is already behind them. Then I set my fork down. "I have a question for the table," I said, and my voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. "How old is Ethan now? 6, right? Or did he just turn 7? The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way a radio signal drops out, in pieces, starting with Carol, whose fork froze halfway to her mouth, then Rachel, whose face went the particular shade of white that only comes from being caught, then Daniel, whose laugh from 30 seconds earlier died somewhere in his throat before it finished leaving his body. "What did you say?" Daniel's brother-in-law asked, genuinely confused, the only person at that table who had no idea what had just been said. "Ethan," I repeated, looking at Daniel now, not at anyone else. "Your son. I found the adoption paperwork. I found the apartment. I found the bank account you've been funding since before Lily could walk. I found 6 years of a group text your mother and sister have been part of, celebrating a little boy's birthdays while I sat across a Thanksgiving table from both of them, not knowing he existed." Nobody moved. I have stood in rooms where a monitor flatlines, where the silence that follows is so total it has its own texture, and this was that silence. 14 people, and not one sound except the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Carol's hand went to her chest. Rachel looked at her plate like it might offer an escape route. Daniel's face did something I will remember for the rest of my life. A full-body collapse of the composure he'd worn every single day for the last 9 days without knowing I already knew. "Sarah," he said, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. "I can explain." "You've had 6 years to explain," I said. "You had 9 days since I found the folder in your desk. You had every dinner, every night I asked how your day was, every single ordinary moment we shared while you knew and I didn't. You didn't explain. You managed me. There's a difference." I pulled the folded papers from my purse and set them on the table between the lemon bars, not slamming them down, just setting them there the way you'd set down a chart in front of a doctor who needed to see the numbers for themselves. "This is his adoption decree, finalized 14 months ago. This is the lease for the apartment on Cambridge Street, in your business's name, $6,000 a year under the radar of anything I'd ever see. This is a photograph of him at what looks like a preschool graduation, wearing the exact same shirt Lily wore to hers, bought from the exact same store, because apparently even your 2 separate lives shared a shopping list." Daniel stared at the papers like they might combust. Nobody reached for them. Carol found her voice first, the way mothers often do when their children are the ones in the wreckage. "Sarah, sweetheart, we didn't know how to tell you. We thought it would break your family apart, we thought. You thought it wasn't your secret to keep for 6 years, I said, turning to her, and I watched something in her face crumble, because she knew, even in that moment, that she didn't have a version of that sentence that ended anywhere good. "You held my daughter at her christening. You sat at my table for 9 Thanksgivings. And this whole time, you had another grandson you were watching grow up in photographs, and you decided I was the one person in this family who didn't get to know he existed." Rachel started crying, the kind of crying that's really about being caught rather than about remorse, and I want to be honest, watching it didn't move me the way it might have 9 days earlier. I had spent too many nights lying awake doing math about my own postpartum depression while my husband built a second family 15 minutes from our house to have much left over for my sister-in-law's tears. Daniel reached across the table for my hand. I moved it before he could touch it. "Sarah, please, let's talk about this somewhere private," he said, his voice low now, urgent. The voice of a man who understood, finally, that the audience he never wanted was the exact one I'd chosen on purpose. "We are talking about it," I said. "In the same room your family's been talking about it in for 6 years, just without me." If you've ever watched someone's whole carefully built story collapse in real time, you know there's a particular moment where the room stops being about anger and starts being about grief for everyone in it, even the people who deserve it least. That moment came for me somewhere around the 3rd minute of silence, when I looked at Daniel's face and realized the man across from me wasn't just someone who'd lied to me. He was someone I genuinely, deeply, no longer recognized. "I need you to understand something," Daniel said, and his hands were shaking now, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "It happened when things were so hard between us. You were struggling so much after Lily, and I felt like I'd already lost you, and Vanessa was it was a mistake. It was never supposed to become anything, and then she was pregnant, and then she died, and I had a little boy with nowhere to go, and I didn't know how to bring that into our house without losing everything. So, instead you built a second house," I said. "For 6 years. And you let your mother and your sister hold that secret with you while I held nothing but the belief that I actually knew my own husband." "I was going to tell you," he said. "I swear I was going to tell you. I just needed the right time I needed." "You had a court finalize his adoption 14 months ago," I said. "You had a legal document with your name on it as his father, and you still didn't think that was the right time." "I don't think there was ever going to be a right time, Daniel. I think you built a life good enough at hiding things that you stopped believing you'd ever have to stop." Carol tried again, reaching for something conciliatory, the way mothers do when they're more afraid of losing the family than they are sorry for the wound. "Sarah, he's a little boy. None of this is his fault. Please don't let this destroy." "I know it's not his fault," I said, and I meant it, more than anyone at that table understood in the moment. "None of this is that little boy's fault. He didn't ask to be hidden. He didn't ask to be kept in an apartment 15 minutes from a family that had room for him and chose not to make it. If anyone in this story is owed an apology bigger than mine, it's him. But that doesn't change what the rest of you did. It doesn't change that every single one of you looked at me for 6 years and decided I was the only person who didn't deserve honesty." Daniel's aunt, sitting near the far end of the table, finally spoke, quiet, almost to herself. "I didn't know any of this. I swear to God I didn't know." I believed her. Not everyone at that table had been part of the secret, I realized then, only some of them, the inner circle, the ones close enough to be trusted with it. That distinction didn't make the evening any less shattering, but it clarified something for me, that betrayal in families is rarely universal. It's curated, distributed carefully to exactly the people who will help protect it, and kept from exactly the ones it's meant to hurt. Rachel's husband, the brother-in-law who'd asked the confused question at the very start, pushed his chair back slightly, the universal posture of a man realizing he'd wandered into something that wasn't his to referee. His kids had already been quietly ushered out of the room by an aunt who had the presence of mind to think of them before anyone else did. Lily's small voice cut through the silence then, from the end of the table where she'd been quietly forgotten in the middle of all of it, still holding half a lemon bar on her fork. "Mommy, why is everyone sad?" That was the moment I stood up. Not because of anger, though there was plenty of that underneath everything else. I stood up because I looked at my daughter's confused face and understood, with total clarity, that nothing productive was going to happen at that table for the rest of the night, that the only thing left to do was remove her, and myself, from a room that had spent 6 years deciding what we both deserved to know. "We're leaving," I said, gathering our coats from the back of my chair. "Lily, go get your shoes, baby." Daniel stood too, fast, panicked in a way I'd never seen from him in 9 years of marriage. "Sarah, please don't do this in front of everyone. Let's just go home and talk." "You had 6 years and a house full of witnesses to talk," I said. "I'm done listening tonight. I'll call you tomorrow about what happens with Lily's schedule. Tonight, we're going to my sister's." I looked at Carol one last time on my way to the door, and something in me softened for exactly 1 second, because underneath the anger I understood that she had also lost something huge that night, a version of her family she'd built carefully around a lie for 6 years, and it was about to collapse the same way mine had. I hope you get to know your grandson without a secret attached to him, I said. He deserves better than what all of you gave him. So did I. Nobody followed us to the car. I buckled Lily into her booster seat with hands that had somehow stayed steady through the entire drive out of that driveway, past the row of familiar cars I would likely never park behind again, and I didn't cry until she fell asleep 40 minutes later in the back seat, somewhere on the interstate, in the dark, alone with the sound of the road and the specific, particular grief of losing an entire family you thought was yours in the space of a single dinner. My sister Amanda met us at her front door in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and didn't ask a single question until Lily was tucked into the guest bed with the nightlight Amanda still kept in that room from when her own kids were small. We sat at her kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning, and I told her everything start to finish, the envelope, the folder, the group chat, the dinner. She didn't say much. She just kept refilling my mug of tea. I never drank and let me talk until there was nothing left to say. You didn't do anything wrong tonight, she said finally, somewhere near the end. You just stopped protecting people who never once thought about protecting you. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay on Amanda's pull-out couch listening to the house settle, replaying the exact moment Daniel's face had cracked open across that table, and somewhere around 4 in the morning I stopped feeling like I was grieving a marriage and started feeling like I was grieving a version of myself, the one who had trusted so completely, so easily, for 9 years, without once thinking to check. The weeks after that dinner were quieter than I expected, in the way a house is quiet after a storm has already done its damage, and there's nothing left to do but survey it. Daniel called every day for the first 2 weeks. I let most of those calls go to voicemail. The ones I answered, I kept short, focused only on Lily, on logistics, on the practical architecture of a marriage in the process of ending. I filed for divorce 6 weeks after that dinner. Ohio doesn't require you to prove fault to end a marriage, but I made sure my attorney had every document I'd found, the bank statements, the lease, the adoption papers, not out of spite, but because I needed a paper trail as airtight as the one Daniel had built to hide his son, except mine was in service of finally getting the truth on the record instead of burying it. I thought filing the papers would feel like the hardest part. It wasn't even close. I learned, through Rachel, of all people, who reached out to me nearly 2 months later with an apology I wasn't sure I believed but appreciated anyway, that Carol and Daniel had a brutal falling out of their own after that dinner. Carol furious that her son's secret had cost her the granddaughter she'd watched grow up for 7 years, angry in a way that seemed to finally understand, too late, that keeping someone's secret doesn't protect them from consequences. It just delays who ends up paying for them. Rachel's message was long, longer than I expected, and somewhere in the middle of it she admitted something I hadn't known even after everything I'd already uncovered, that she'd argued with Daniel more than once over the years about telling me, that she'd told him directly, more than a year before I found that envelope, that keeping it going was going to destroy more than it protected. He hadn't listened. I appreciated her honesty, even that late, even though it didn't undo the years she'd spent choosing her brother's comfort over my right to know the truth of my own life. I didn't respond for several days. When I finally did, I kept it short. I told her I believed she meant the apology, and that I hoped, for Ethan's sake if nothing else, that the family found a way to build something honest going forward, even if it no longer included me. I meant that. I still do. That wasn't the last hard conversation I'd have that year. It wasn't even close to the last. The divorce took just under 8 months to finalize, faster than my attorney expected, mostly because Daniel didn't contest much of anything. I think some part of him understood there was nothing left to fight for, not after that dinner, not after the version of himself that had built a second life in secret got laid out on his mother's dining table in front of everyone who mattered to him. Ethan is 7 now. I've met him exactly twice, both times during custody exchanges that involve Lily, both times a strange, quiet collision of 2 lives that were never supposed to intersect the way they eventually did. He is, by every account, a sweet kid who had no say in any of it, who lost his mother at 4, and spent years being managed like a liability instead of loved like a son. I don't carry any anger toward him. I never did. The first time I met him was in a parking lot outside a pediatric dental office, of all places, both of us there by coincidence for our own children's appointments on the same Tuesday afternoon. He was sitting in the back seat of Daniel's car while Daniel unbuckled him, a small, serious-looking boy with Daniel's jaw and someone else's eyes, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. Lily, who by then understood in the simplified way a 7-year-old understands anything this complicated that she had a half-brother she didn't really know yet, waved at him through the window. He waved back, shy, uncertain, the way any child is uncertain around strangers who share their blood but not their history. Neither of us said his name out loud that day. We didn't need to. We both already knew exactly who he was. I didn't approach the car. I wasn't ready, and I didn't think it was fair to either of them to pretend otherwise just to prove something to myself. I nodded at Daniel, got Lily settled in my own car, and drove away with a strange, unexpected ache in my chest that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with grief for a little boy who'd been dealt a hand he never should have had to play. The second time was at a school function nearly a year later, a joint custody logistics meeting that happened to overlap with a Ridgeline Elementary spring fair. Both of our children, it turned out, still attending the same school in different grades, a fact that still occasionally catches me off guard even now. Ethan was kicking a soccer ball around near the fence with a couple of other kids, laughing in a way that suggested, at least in that moment, whatever he'd lost hadn't swallowed all of him. I watched him for a while before Daniel noticed me watching. "He's a good kid," Daniel said quietly, coming to stand near me, not too close. It was the first real conversation we'd had since the divorce that wasn't strictly about scheduling. None of this was ever his fault. For a second, standing there, I almost forgot everything that had happened between us. Almost. "I know," I said. I never blamed him for any of it. I just wish someone had thought about what was fair to him as much as they thought about what was convenient for the rest of you. Daniel didn't have an answer for that. I don't think there is one. Daniel still lives in Columbus, in a smaller place now, seeing Lily every other weekend under a custody arrangement my attorney and I built to be as clean and unambiguous as the secret he kept never was. I don't know what his relationship with Ethan looks like day to day. I've made peace with the fact that it isn't mine to know anymore. What I learned, sitting through all of it, is that the people who build secrets rarely build them alone. They build support systems, quiet networks of people who agree, explicitly or not, that protecting the liar matters more than protecting the person being lied to. I had a whole family who chose that version of loyalty for 6 years, and I understand now that I owe none of them my forgiveness just because they eventually got caught. I moved into a smaller house 11 months after that dinner, 3 miles from our old one, close enough that Lily didn't have to change schools, far enough that I stopped waking up in a bedroom full of 9 years of memories I couldn't trust anymore. Amanda helped me paint the kitchen a soft, buttery yellow, the exact opposite of the cool gray Daniel had always preferred, and I remember standing in that kitchen the first night with the paint still faintly wet in one corner, feeling something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter than that. Steadiness. I hadn't felt steady in almost a year. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it until it came back. Priya still asks me, every so often, whether I regret how I handled that dinner, whether a quieter, more private confrontation might have spared everyone the spectacle. I've thought about that question honestly, more than once, and my answer hasn't changed. I don't regret it. Some betrayals happen in the dark, because that's where the people responsible for them feel safest. I wasn't willing to let mine end there too. Carol reached out once, about 4 months after the divorce was finalized, a short, careful letter rather than a phone call, apologizing in a way that felt more complete than anything she'd managed to say at that dinner table. She wrote that she understood now why I'd needed the truth to come out the way it did, that keeping it contained for 6 years hadn't protected anyone, it had just delayed a reckoning that everyone involved eventually had to face anyway. I appreciated the letter. I didn't write back right away, and when I finally did, months later, it was brief, but it was honest, which felt like the only kind of correspondence that made sense between us anymore. I found out I had a stepson from a school enrollment form that was never supposed to reach my hands. 6 years of a hidden life, unraveled by a clerical mistake that happened to arrive on exactly the right Tuesday. I think about that sometimes, how close I came to never opening that envelope at all, how easily I could have handed it straight to Daniel unopened and let him keep managing a version of my life he'd already decided I wasn't allowed to fully live. I called the Ridgeline front office once, months later, mostly out of a strange, lingering curiosity, and asked the woman who answered whether she remembered the mix-up. She didn't, of course. Why would she? It had been one small clerical error among thousands she processed that year, completely unremarkable from where she sat. I didn't tell her what that single mistake had actually done. Some things aren't meant to be explained to the person who unknowingly set them into motion. I just thanked her and hung up, sitting in my car outside the very school building where an entire second life had been quietly enrolled a hallway away from my daughter's classroom for a full year without my knowledge. Lily asks about Ethan sometimes, in the simple, unfiltered way children ask about complicated things. She knows he's her half-brother. She knows their dad loves them both, even if that love got built in a shape neither of them chose. I've tried to answer her questions honestly, without burdening her with more of the anger that isn't hers to carry, because whatever I lost in that dining room, I refuse to let it cost my daughter her ability to trust the people who are honest with her now. If you've ever built your whole understanding of a marriage on a foundation that turned out to be half true, you already know that the hardest part isn't the anger. It's rebuilding your own judgment, learning to trust yourself again after finding out you missed something that big for that long. I'm still learning that. Some days I trust myself completely. Other days I catch myself double-checking mail, rereading texts, doing the quiet, exhausting math of a person who used to believe honesty was the baseline and now knows it never is, not automatically, not just because you love someone and share a house and a last name with them. That's my story. A manila envelope, a lemon bar dinner, and a truth that had been hiding 15 minutes down the road for 6 years while I thought I knew every room in my own life. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed the shape of your whole family, hear me. You are allowed to choose how the truth gets told, even when you didn't choose the lie. And you are allowed to walk away from anyone, even people who share your blood, who decided your knowing the truth mattered less than their comfort in keeping it from you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.